The monitors were flatlining. The doctors had stepped back. Her mother sobbed into her hands, while nurses gently asked her to prepare for the worst. But just as the light in Emily's eyes began to dim, a low growl echoed in the hospital room. Then came the barking, sharp, urgent, almost commanding. Her dog Max, who had been silent for days, leapt onto the hospital bed. What happened next left the entire ICU in stunned silence and changed the definition of hope forever. Emily was only 9 years old when her life took a drastic turn. Until then, she'd been just like any other little girl in Blue Ridge, Virginia, playful, full of energy, the kind who wore mismatched socks on purpose and carried rocks in her backpack for luck. Her best friend in the world wasn't a classmate or even a sibling. It was her golden retriever, Max. Max had been with her since she was a baby, a gift from her late grandfather. From the very beginning, they were inseparable. He would wait at the window every day until the school bus returned. They shared meals, dreams, and secrets. Emily once whispered to Max that she wanted to be a veterinarian, just like the one who saved Max when he got a piece of glass in his paw. But that dream began to fade when Emily's health started to change. It began subtly, slight fevers, occasional fatigue, bruises she couldn't explain. Doctors initially suspected a minor infection, but as weeks turned into months, her condition worsened. She became pale, weak, and spent more time in bed than at school. Her once glowing laughter turned into soft whimpers. Max never left her side, even when she was too tired to pet him. Eventually, after a string of hospital visits and a flood of tests, the diagnosis arrived like a cold, merciless wave: acute myeloid leukemia. Emily's parents were devastated. Treatments began immediately. Chemotherapy sessions drained what little energy she had left. Her long, strawberry blonde hair fell out in clumps. Her mother shaved her own head in solidarity. Her father tried to hold it together, but the weight of watching his daughter fade was unbearable. And through it all, Max stayed. The hospital made an exception for Max, recognizing his emotional support certification and the obvious bond he shared with Emily. Nurses admitted they'd never seen a dog so attuned to a child's pain. When Emily had fevers, Max would whine and paw at the nurse's station before the machines even picked it up. When she had nightmares, he'd curl around her and stay alert all night. Still, the doctors were cautious with their optimism. Emily's leukemia was aggressive. Treatment options began to dwindle. One failed trial led to another. Her body wasn't responding. By winter, she was moved to palliative care. One frigid morning in December, doctors approached her parents. With heavy hearts, there was nothing more they could do. It was time to prepare to say goodbye. Emily knew. She was only 9, but the look in her eyes said she understood more than most adults ever could. She asked for just one thing: for Max to be with her, to stay until the end. Max, for his part, had stopped eating. His eyes seemed older now, weighed down by sorrow. He lay beside Emily, unmoving, as if he too was preparing for goodbye. Then, the night came. The machines had been beeping at slower intervals. Emily's breathing had grown shallow. A nurse quietly took her mother aside. "It's time." Her father knelt by the bed, holding her hand, barely able to speak through his tears. "Baby, if you need to go, it's okay. We'll be okay. Max will stay with you." But Emily didn't respond. Her hand was limp. The monitors were nearly flatlining. Max stood up. It was sudden, sharp, a jolt of energy the staff hadn't seen in days. He let out a low, guttural growl. Then he jumped onto the bed and began barking directly into Emily's face. Loud, sharp, repeated barks that echoed off the sterile walls of the ICU. Nurses rushed in, unsure whether to remove him. Her mother started to scream but then stopped. Emily's hand twitched. Max barked again. Louder, her eyelids fluttered. One more bark, and this time Emily opened her eyes. The room went completely still. Her father froze mid-cry. Her mother dropped her coffee. The monitors began beeping faster, registering a heartbeat that was previously almost undetectable. "Emily," her mother whispered. The little girl blinked. Then, ever so faintly, she mouthed, "Max." Tears fell. Everyone cried. The doctors were stunned. They ran new tests. Something no one could say what had triggered a response in her central nervous system. A spontaneous neural spike. One physician called it a ghost signal. Another muttered the word miracle. But to her parents, and to Max it didn't matter. She was awake. She was breathing. And for the first time in months she was smiling. The hospital kept her in critical care, monitoring every vital. No one dared explain what had happened. Max didn't care. He returned to her side, curled up against her, his head on her chest. From that moment forward, Max wouldn't leave her alone for even a second. And for Emily, hope that had vanished for so long had returned. But the journey was far from over, and what Max would do next would leave the entire medical world speechless. News of Emily's sudden awakening spread through the hospital like wildfire. Doctors, nurses, janitors, even patients in other wings found excuses to pass by her room. The little girl who had been given a week to live was now awake, smiling, and eating ice chips, and always by her side was Max, the golden retriever with the eyes of a guardian angel. No one had a scientific explanation. Her medical chart still showed signs of decline, but her vitals, while fragile, were steady. Brain scans showed mild activity in regions doctors believed had gone dormant. One intern muttered something about miracle neurons. Another likened Max's barks to defibrillators for the soul. Emily was weak but conscious. The color returned to her cheeks. She was even able to lift her hand to pet Max, which made him wag his tail so hard it shook the hospital bed. For the first time in weeks, her laughter echoed in the halls. Still, not everyone celebrated. Drive Ramsey, the hospital's chief oncologist, was a man of science. Mid-50s, graying at the temples, always with a clipboard in hand. He watched the scene unfold with conflicted eyes. Miracles made headlines, not medical journals. And headlines didn't save lives. She's stable for now, he said to her parents, but this doesn't change her prognosis. The cancer is still there. The remission didn't magically appear. But she's awake, her father replied, with a mix of hope and disbelief. Yes, and that's something. But we can't mistake a moment of consciousness for recovery. What doctor? Ramsey didn't know what none of them knew was that Max was not done yet. That night, when the nurses dimmed the lights and her parents dozed in chairs, Max stood guard. He sat beside the 4 machine and watched the blinking numbers as if he understood them. Occasionally, he would look at Emily, then at the machine, then back to her. His eyes never left her face. At 3:17 a.m., Emily began to shake. Her body trembled under the blankets. The machine started to beep rapidly. Her mother leapt from her chair just as nurses burst into the room. It was a seizure. Max sprang onto the bed again. But this time, he didn't bark. Instead, he lay across her chest, his full body pressing down like a weighted blanket. His head nestled under her chin. The trembling slowed. The monitor sound steadied. The staff stood in stunned silence. After 20 seconds, it stopped. She's regulating, on her own. The nurse whispered ... The next day, Emily remembered none of it, but when told what happened, she just smiled and said, Max knew what to do. Her bond with Max deepened in ways no one could quite understand. They communicated without speaking. Emily would glance at Max, and he would act fetching her socks, laying across her feet, barking once when she felt pain. Max had never been trained as a service dog, and yet he behaved better than any they'd ever seen. It wasn't long before Dr. Ramsey took notice. He began requesting recordings of their interactions. Nurses filmed as Max reacted to changes in her oxygen levels before any machines picked up on them. They documented how Emily's pulse would drop during high-stress blood draws until Max placed a paw on her hand. Somehow, this dog had become a living, breathing stabilizer. Dr. Ramsey even began jokingly referring to Max as our furry anesthesiologist. But not everyone believed it was enough. Emily's parents were torn. Her condition, while improved, was not sustainable. She was living on borrowed time, and there was a new trial, experimental, high risk, and only available in Boston. It involved intense chemo and an aggressive stem cell transplant. The success rate was low. The side effects were brutal. But if it worked, it could mean a future. They debated for days. Emily made the decision herself. "I want to fight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But Max comes too. Transporting Max to Boston wasn't easy. Hospitals had strict policies. But Emily's story had started gaining traction online. Someone from the hospital had anonymously posted the story of the little girl who woke up because her dog barked. Within a week, it had millions of views. News stations picked it up. A segment on national television aired, and suddenly Emily and Max were the heart of America. Donations poured in. Offers from private jet companies. Letters from families with similar stories. One woman from Oregon claimed her dog sensed her breast cancer before her mammogram. A firefighter from Texas swore his canine partner saved him from a burning building by detecting a floor collapse moments before it happened. It was as if Max had opened a door to something larger than medicine. Eventually, the Boston hospital agreed Max could come under strict supervision. He'd need his own health clearance, travel paperwork, and a signed agreement. 3 weeks later, Emily and Max boarded a medical flight to Boston, accompanied by her parents and a nurse. The city was colder than they expected, but the hospital was warm. A new team of specialists greeted them, already briefed on Emily's case, and already aware of Max. The lead physician, Dr. Anika Sharma, had a reputation for thinking outside the box. She was brilliant, direct, and known to challenge traditional methods. When she saw Max for the first time, she smiled and said, "Looks like I'll be sharing my rounds." The treatment began immediately. High-dose chemotherapy, isolation, frequent blood work. Max was allowed limited access only during specific hours, but even then, his presence made a difference. The staff noticed that Emily's heart rate would spike during treatments unless Max was in the room, so they made a new rule. Max would be there for every major procedure. He wore a tiny badge, Dr. Max, emotional support specialist, and he earned every bit of it. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling chemo session, Emily vomited for nearly 20 minutes. Her face was pale, her body limp. Nurses debated sedating her. Max walked up to the bed, placed his front paws beside her, and leaned his head against hers. His eyes closed, his breathing slow. Emily's breathing matched his. She whispered, "I'm okay." Max says, "I'm okay." She slept peacefully after that. It wasn't magic. It wasn't science. But it was something in between. Weeks passed. The doctors began to see changes. Her white blood cell count improved. Her body, somehow, was enduring more than they'd hoped. Dr. Sharma called it a trend of anomalies. Her team called it the Max effect. But the hardest part was still ahead: the stem cell transplant. It would require complete immune suppression. Emily would be at her most vulnerable. Max wouldn't be allowed near her. For at least 10 days post-transplant, Emily was terrified. "Will he forget me?" she asked. Her mother shook her head. "Never." The night before the procedure, Emily asked to be alone with Max. Nurses placed them in a quiet room. No machines, no beeping, just a little girl and her dog. She wrapped her arms around him and whispered something no one could hear. Max licked her face. They stayed like that for hours. And when the time came, when the doors closed and the doctors suited up, Max sat outside that sterile room, unmoving, waiting, because what was coming next would be the ultimate test of faith. 10 days. That was the number that echoed through Emily's mind as the doors to the transplant unit shut behind her. 10 days without Max. 10 days without the warmth of his fur, the steady rhythm of his breath, or the soft sound of his paws tapping the hospital floor. She had endured months of pain, needles, fear, but nothing compared to this. For Max, those 10 days were no easier. He sat outside the sterile glass doors, refusing to move. Nurses brought him food, he ignored it. Doctors walked by, he barely acknowledged them. The hospital staff, once skeptical of a dog being allowed in their halls, now treated Max like royalty. But no amount of affection could coax him away from his post. every so often, he would stand, peer through the narrow observation window, and let out a soft whimper. He couldn't see Emily. She was kept in a sealed, sanitized room down the hall. But he knew she was there, and that was enough to keep him waiting. Inside, Emily was fighting for her life. The stem cell transplant was the most dangerous procedure she'd undergone yet. First, they had to destroy her immune system, completely, essentially wiping her clean to allow the donor cells to take over. That meant she had no defense against even the most common infections. She was hooked up to 4 drips, oxygen monitors, and more wires than her parents could count. The nurses wore protective gowns and masks every time they entered. Her skin became paper thin, her eyes sunken, but her spirit, though strained, held on, and so did Max's. Each morning, a nurse updated Emily on Max's status. He's still there, they'd say, still hasn't moved. Emily would smile, faintly. He's waiting for me. On the 5th day, Emily spiked a fever. Her blood pressure dropped dangerously low. Her lips turned blue, her breathing ragged. Doctors rushed in, administering emergency antibiotics. Her mother collapsed into a chair outside the room. Sobbing, her father called out to every god he'd ever heard of. Max howled. It was a long, sorrowful sound, one that echoed through the entire floor. The kind of sound that made even the toughest nurses stop in their tracks. The ICU night shift supervisor later said she had never heard anything like it, like grief and defiance rolled into one. Then something shifted. Emily stabilized. The fever broke the next morning. Whatever you're doing, Dr. Sharma told the team, keep doing it. What they didn't know was that Max had spent the entire night pressed against the wall, closest to her room, his paws flat on the floor, his nose twitching as if trying to reach her scent through layers of concrete and steel. By the 7th day, Emily began to regain consciousness. She was fragile, her voice barely a whisper, but she opened her eyes and moved her hand. The transplant had taken hold. Her body wasn't rejecting it. The stem cells were integrating slowly. Miraculously, when the 10th day finally arrived, the staff gathered around Max's spot in front of the glass doors. Dr. Sharma walked up with a rare smile. Okay, buddy, she said, let's see your girl. The doors opened. Max didn't wait. He rushed down the hall, paws slipping slightly on the polished floor, tail wagging uncontrollably. He skidded to a stop at Emily's door. The nurses helped her sit up just a little, and as they opened the door, Max leapt gently onto the bed, curled around her like a protective halo, and let out the softest sigh. Emily pressed her face into his fur and whispered, I missed you. She cried. So did her mother, even Dr. Ramsey, watching from the back, wiped his eyes. He never left, Emily said. Not really. The next few weeks were a cautious dance of recovery. Her body was fragile, but growing stronger. Her blood counts rose. She started eating solid food again. Max became a full-time resident in her room, lying beside her during morning rounds, listening during therapy, and napping under her bed while she read books aloud to him. The bond between them had become the centerpiece of Emily's recovery, and it wasn't just emotional. The doctors noticed real, quantifiable changes when Max was in the room. Her cortisol levels, an indicator of stress, dropped dramatically. Her blood pressure stabilized. Her pain reports were lower. Nurses jokingly began recording Max minutes, documenting how long he stayed on the bed and matching that with Emily's vitals. The results were consistent. Max didn't just make her feel better, he made her physically better. Dr. Sharma submitted a proposal to the hospital board, a formal case study documenting the impact of canine companions in pediatric oncology. Emily and Max were the centerpiece. We need to understand this, she said during her pitch. Because what this dog is doing, it's real. It's repeatable. And it might change everything. The proposal was accepted, but not everyone was thrilled. One board member questioned the ethics. Are we letting a 9-year-old's bond with her pet dictate medical protocol? Dr. Sharma responded simply, she should be dead. She's not. I'm going to follow whatever works. By month's end, Emily's test results showed something remarkable. Her bone marrow had accepted the transplant completely. The doctors were stunned. In medical terms, she was engrafted. The cancer cells were undetectable. It didn't mean she was cured, not yet, but it meant she had a chance. Emily asked to go outside, just once. She hadn't seen the sun in months. She missed the wind. And Max, though loyal, was growing restless in the sterile white rooms. So one crisp spring morning, the hospital wheeled Emily out into the rooftop garden. She wore a surgical mask and was wrapped in 3 blankets. Max walked beside her, tethered gently to the wheelchair. When they reached the corner of the garden, Emily reached up and pulled off her mask. Just for a minute, she whispered ... She tilted her face toward the sky and closed her eyes. Max sat beside her, his head on her lap. A nurse took a photo, one that would later go viral across the country. A little girl with no hair, her face lifted to the sun, and a golden retriever by her side like a silent guardian. The caption simply read, "Hope has a name, and it's Max." But the story wasn't over yet, because just when they thought the worst had passed, something unexpected happened. A sudden, terrifying twist that no one, not even Max, saw coming. Spring had brought with it more than sunshine. It brought the illusion of peace. Emily's days were filled with cautious optimism, short walks in the hospital garden, art therapy with other patients, and long, quiet evenings with Max curled at her feet. The transplant had worked. Her blood results continued to shine with promise. The cancer was undetectable. For the first time in months, the word future didn't sound like a cruel joke. Her parents even began to whisper about planned school again. Maybe a family trip when the doctors gave the green light. Something small to celebrate life returning. But hope can be deceptive. It was on a rainy Thursday in mid-April that Emily first complained of a headache. Nothing major, just a dull pressure behind her eyes. The nurse on duty chalked it up to fatigue. Emily had started eating more and moving around. Her body was adjusting, but the next morning, she vomited twice. Then she slept through most of the day. Max, who normally stirred and paced when Emily was active, stayed pressed tightly to her side, head alert, eyes scanning. By the evening, Emily was running a low-grade fever. The doctors ran blood work immediately. Her white cell count had plummeted. Could be a post-transplant dip, Dr. Sharma said cautiously. It happens, but Max didn't buy it. He began pacing again, barking, not loud, aggressive barks, but short, rhythmic sounds, as if calling for something. He stood at the door, then back at Emily, then at the door again. Then, something strange happened. During the nightly round of tests, a nurse tried to adjust Emily's line, and Max suddenly lunged gently, but urgently, placing his paw between the nurse and the tube, whining low in his throat. It wasn't aggression, it was alarm. He was trying to say something. The nurse stepped back, confused. A moment later, the 4 monitor began to beep. The line had clotted, a clot that, had it moved further, could have caused a stroke. Max had known. He's not just reacting to her, the nurse whispered to another. He's sensing it, but then came the real blow. A spinal tap revealed blast cells in her cerebrospinal fluid. The cancer was back, but this time it had reached her brain. The news hit the hospital like a thunderclap. The team had been celebrating. Everyone had believed the transplant was a success, even Dr. Ramsey, ever the skeptic, had cracked a smile the week before when Emily painted him a picture of Max wearing a doctor's coat. Now, the color drained from every face in the room. CNS relapse, Dr. Sharma said grimly. It's rare, and it's brutal. Emily's parents were shattered. Her mother sat silent, staring at the wall. Her father asked only one question. Can she survive this? No one answered. They started a new round of chemo. Immediately this time, injected directly into the spinal cord. It was excruciating. Emily screamed. Through the first treatment, her body trembled. Her fingernails bled from how hard she clenched her fists. Max barked the entire time. When the doctors finally allowed him back into the room, he didn't curl up next to her this time. He stood, stiff-legged, pressed against her side like a sentry. His ears twitched with every beep of the machines. He didn't sleep for nearly 48 hours. But even Max couldn't hold back the tide. Emily worsened. The fever returned. Her left side grew weak. Her vision blurred. Max would bark every time her heart monitor spiked and whine when it dropped. He began eating less, sleeping less. It was as though the sickness was draining him too. Then, on a gray morning just before dawn, Emily slipped into a coma. The hospital room dim with grief. Her parents didn't speak. The doctors shuffled in and out, hollow-eyed. No one said it, but everyone felt it. This might be the end. Max lay across her legs, his head on her chest, as if trying to hold her spirit in place. The staff considered moving him out, giving the family privacy, but Dr. Sharma overruled them. He stays, she said firmly. If she's going, she deserves to go with him next to her. But Max had other plans. On the second night of her coma, something strange happened. The hospital's security camera in Emily's room captured it. The footage, later reviewed by over a dozen people, showed Max suddenly rise from his spot around 13 a.m. He walked to the foot of the bed, looked up at Emily, and let out a single bark. Then another, then a third, louder, sharper, almost commanding. In the hallway, the nurses heard it and ran in. They found Emily's fingers twitching. Her monitor beeped irregularly. A nurse leaned close, barely breathing. "Emily?" A soft moan escaped her lips. Max barked again, short, insistent. Emily's eyelids fluttered. And then she opened her eyes. It wasn't a full awakening. Her gaze was hazy. Her lips were dry and cracked. But she was there. "I heard him," she whispered. Voice like sandpaper. Tears erupted in the room. The nurse called for Dr. Sharma, who came running barefoot. Emily blinked slowly. "Max wouldn't let me go. Doctor." Sharma wept openly. She was a scientist, a professional, a woman who had seen miracles come and go. But this was something deeper. Emily remained in critical condition, but now she was fighting again. Over the next few days, her mind returned in pieces. She would sleep for hours, then wake just long enough to see Max and say his name. And with every awakening, he grew stronger again, to his tail wagging, his ears perked. But time was no longer a luxury they could count on. The doctors decided on one final treatment, TAN immunotherapy, that hadn't been used on children yet. It carried massive risks, but it was the only shot left. This sat her parents down, told them the truth. She could go into full remission, or it could take her in a day. Her mother looked at Max, who had climbed onto Emily's bed once more. "She's already halfway gone," she said softly. "If this gives her a chance, we take it." The treatment began the next morning. It was the longest 72 hours of their lives. Emily shook violently for hours. Her lips cracked. Her lungs needed oxygen. Max never left her side, not once. On the third night, Emily flatlined for 7 seconds. Alarms screamed. Doctors poured in. Her mother collapsed to the floor. But then, a single bark. Max, standing on the bed, head tilted toward her heart, and then a heartbeat, weak but steady. She came back. By the time the sun rose over the hospital's eastern wing, something had changed. Emily wasn't just alive, she was awake. Weak, yes, pale and bruised from countless needles and tubes. But her eyes were open, and they were locked onto Max. He had moved from her bed in over 3 days. His fur was matted, his eyes bloodshot. But as Emily reached out and let her fingertips brush his muzzle, he let out a soft, guttural whimper, half relief, half disbelief. The ICU nurses couldn't contain themselves. Some wept openly. Others just turned and whispered to each other, "Did we just see a resurrection?" Doctors ran tests again and again. Emily's white cell count was rising naturally. Her spinal fluid showed no active cancer cells. The aggressive immunotherapy, which should have wrecked her fragile body, instead seemed to have ignited a dormant defense system. Dr. Sharma called it biological defiance. But to the rest of the world, it was simply Max. The story caught fire. It started small, just a nurse who tweeted a blurry photo of Max curled up on Emily's bed with the caption, "He never left her side." And she came back. Then a local news station got a hold of it. Then a national network. Within a week, Max and Emily were on the cover of 3 newspapers and hashtag Miracle Dog Max trended globally. But for Emily and her parents, the world outside the hospital didn't matter. All that mattered was that she was here. Still, one night, weeks into recovery, Emily turned to her father and whispered, "I think Max knew. I think he always knew I wasn't done." He didn't argue, because deep down, he believed it too. Emily's healing accelerated. Slowly but steadily, she began to walk again, first with a walker, then on her own, with Max by her side. Every time her legs trembled, Max adjusted his pace. When she dropped something, he nudged it toward her with his nose. He learned commands doctors never trained him for, like support or guide, as if the bond between them had rewritten his instincts. It was beyond service. It was symbiosis. And science noticed. Dr. Sharma's proposed case study became a national research initiative. Universities reached out. Animal behaviorists asked to study Max. Oncology journals published articles with titles like The Healing Power of Canine Intuition. But Max didn't care about the spotlight. He only cared about Emily. Even when she was discharged from the hospital a full 6 months after her original diagnosis, he refused to leave her side. He rode with her in the ambulance, slept in her room the first night back, followed her to the bathroom, waited outside during showers, sat next to her as she did puzzles or read books in bed. At school, the principal allowed a special exception. Max could attend. At first, there was hesitation from staff and students, but on the first day, when Max trotted beside Emily down the hallway, tail swishing, eyes alert, and she smiled, truly smiled. For the first time since her diagnosis, the entire building erupted in applause. He became a legend. Students drew pictures of him, teachers wrote poems, and once a month, a therapy class was held entirely on the topic of Max moments, lessons about resilience, loyalty, and silent strength. But the most important moment came quietly, at home. It was a cool autumn evening. Nearly a year after Emily's last treatment, she sat on the porch with her mom, wrapped in a thick sweater. Max lay across her feet, warming them. "I don't remember a lot of what happened," Emily said softly. "It's all blurry, except for him. He's the only part that's clear." Her mother looked down at Max and nodded. "He never gave up. Not once, I think," Emily said, resting her chin on her knees. "He loved me so much that my body had to listen. And maybe it did. The final bone marrow biopsy came back clean. No trace of cancer. Not in her blood. Not in her spine. Not in her brain. She was declared in full remission. The day the news came, the family didn't scream. They didn't throw a party. They simply sat in a quiet circle on the living room rug, with Max in the middle, and held each other. Max placed his head in Emily's lap and closed his eyes. The world eventually moved on. The news cycles shifted. Viral hashtags faded. Other stories came and went. But in a small suburban town in Pennsylvania, a girl who should have died walked every morning to school beside a golden retriever. With soulful eyes and a calm, unshakable presence, Emily grew stronger. She began writing, first in journals, then short stories, then an essay titled "The Dog Who Wouldn't Let Me Die," which later became a children's book read in schools across the country. Max grew older. His muzzle grayed. His steps slowed. But he never missed a single day by Emily's side. On her birthdays, he sat next to the cake. At Halloween, he wore whatever costume she chose: fireman, doctor, even a dragon. On Christmas mornings, he barked once for every present she opened. And on her 15th birthday, years after the transplant, Emily stood in front of her classmates during an assembly and told her story. She held up a photo of Max young, strong, and golden. "He didn't just save my life," she said. "He gave it meaning." A hush fell over the room. That night, Emily curled beside Max on the floor and whispered, "You can rest now, okay? You did everything, and more." He wagged his tail once, licked her hand, and as the stars blinked softly above, Max drifted into a sleep that felt deeper than usual. Quieter. By morning, he was gone. He had passed peacefully, curled beside the girl he had refused to let die. The world wept again. Tributes poured in videos, poems, drawings. Animal shelters saw a spike in adoptions. The town built a bronze statue outside the hospital garden. A golden retriever sitting proudly, nose pointed toward the sky. At the base, the inscription read, "Max, he waited, he watched, he saved her." And every year, on the day of his passing, Emily returns with flowers and sits beside the statue. She brings her new dog, Luna Rescue, nervous, timid, but learning, because now it's Emily's turn to teach.